Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening. My recent video on what makes a good tram line got lots and lots of really interesting comments. A few people were asking, why didn't you include any footage from my city's tram network? Good point, I haven't been there yet. I guess I'm just going to have to make some videos about other cities' tram networks, aren't I? Leave your nominations in the comments section. But the specific question that came up a lot was, why don't we have double-decker trams anymore? And to be honest, it's not something I've really thought about before. But yeah, the norm, at least here in the UK, was for double-deckers. The only UK tram network that still uses them is Blackpool, and that's in the unusual situation of being an original network that never closed. I understand Hong Kong and Alexandria also still use them. Oh, and I believe the Douglas Horse Tramway has one. But again, that's one that never closed. There are also several museums and heritage tramways, but I'm going to put those to one side for the moment. Britain seems to like double-decker transport, whether that's buses or trams. Not trains, though, although that might make for a good video in itself. I think it dates back to the days of the stagecoaches, when you could sit indoors or on the roof. Stagecoach operators would charge a higher rate to sit indoors with the gentry, as they put it. Frankly, travelling on the roof of a stagecoach in winter sounds like about the least fun you can have. It was a logical step for horse-drawn buses to have an upper deck, because obviously you can carry a lot more people and make a lot more money. In 1807, Britain got its first horse-drawn tramway in the form of the Swansea and Mumbles Railway, and this too had an upper deck. And we just sort of stuck with it. In the 20th century, trams started to go out of fashion, replaced by buses and cars. Tram lines were often poorly maintained, and passengers in London trams recalled that riding on the upper deck could be a rather hair-raising experience, as they swayed and bumped along the track. Cities abandoned their trams one by one, and by 1962 only Blackpool and the Isle of Man remained. Well, I suppose you have Volks Electric Railway as well. Does that count as a tram? I never know whether to count that as a tram. But later on in the century, car-centric transport policies started to backfire. Cities became gridlocked and polluted, and it was trams that came to the rescue. But the trams that showed up on these new networks looked very different. Gone were the upper decks. Instead, additional capacity was provided by simply lengthening the trams, coupling them together, or just ordering long vehicles. Now, there are two reasons for this. One is that British networks tend to buy their trams more or less off the peg from overseas manufacturers. We don't really have any builders capable of producing a fleet of trams to order these days, and the manufacturers who do build trams tend to go for variations on single-deckers. The other is to do with the nature of modern trams. The other victim of car-centric transport policies in the UK was branch line railways. Many of these were run down or even closed altogether under British Railways' modernisation plan. When it came to reintroducing trams, these branch lines, or former branch lines in some cases, were perfect for rebuilding as tram lines. They could bypass busy roads and avoid traffic jams, and much of what they needed infrastructure-wise was already in place. Unfortunately, this meant that they had to work with existing bridges and tunnels, which were too low for double-decker trams. So, even if the new networks had been married to the idea of double-deckers, it just wasn't practical. There are other points you could make that go against double-deckers. They're slower to load and unload than single-deckers. That staircase takes up space. There isn't as much accessible space. But I think these are relatively minor concerns. After all, Britain loves its double-decker buses, and those are designed with these considerations in mind. So that, in short, is why we don't have double-decker trams anymore. Because we don't build the same kinds of tram networks that we used to. Blackpool and Douglas can still run them, because they are the old tram networks that we used to have. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the staircase to my upper deck. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.